In this lesson, we're going to go over internet files. And primarily what we're talking about here is we're talking about the cache and cookie storage from web browsers. And what I'm going to focus on here is Internet Explorer, and different operating systems and different browsers will have different places where they store information, but the concepts are really the same. And the concept is that we're looking for a cache of data that browsers have downloaded to a temporary storage so that it can be used again later on without actually having to go back out to the network. Or there are cookies, and we'll get into what cookies are and why they're useful in a little bit. And of course, there's the history as well. Now, you don't actually have to launch the browser to see any of this information. What I'm going to do here is just using the File Explorer, the Windows Explorer. I've gone into the users directory on a Windows 7 system, and earlier versions of Windows, getting access to the user directory is a little bit different, but it's still located on the C drive. It used to be in Documents and Settings, and then you'd go into the user. With more recent versions of Windows, we just go into the users directory, and then I'm going to go into the user itself. Now, in order to get here, I actually have to change some settings, and I've already done that, but let me just show you here. If I go into Organize and Folder and Search options, and then go over to the View tab, I want to click this Show Hidden Folders, Files, and Drives, and I also want to uncheck Hide Protected Operating System Files. If I don't do that, then I'm not going to see some of these files and directories that I need to be able to get access to in order to get to the data that I want. So I'm going to go into the app data directory, and I'm going to go into local and Microsoft, then Windows, and you can see here temporary internet files. And here's all of the cache that has been stored for callback later on. A lot of this would be larger files like images that we would want to store for the purposes of being able to bring them back up again quickly. So let's take a look at this one and see if we can bring it up. And it's going to bring it up in Internet Explorer, and you can see it's just a picture of Snoopy and Lucy and Linus from the Peanuts. So that's what that picture happens to be. But you've got all of these pictures that are stored here, and this is the cache. So this is everything that's being stored temporarily, and you can see that there are a lot of files here. And this, for example, these files here that say .js, these are JavaScript files. And it's possible that these JavaScript files could contain malicious commands or programmatic constructs that would cause damage to your system. And if it did, and the programmer wasn't able to actually cover its tracks in some way, then you may still have these JavaScript files still sitting in the cache, and you may be able to go into them and figure out what actually happened if they were still there. So you can see all of the pictures and various other files that are sitting out here in the cache. And there's a lot of other data that we're going to want to take a look at as well. So if I go back up here, now I can go into history, which is in this same directory here. So here's where the history is stored, and this is where you would find all of the servers or websites that somebody had visited on a particular system. This would all be in the history. And again, this is for Internet Explorer. Like I said, different browsers store their data in different ways. For example, Firefox uses a SQLite database for different types of data like cookies and various other things that they store on the behalf of the user. In the case of Internet Explorer and some other browsers, it's just stored like this in the file system, but it's in a part of the file system that's normally hidden from the typical user. So now let's go see if we can find the cookies here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up and go to roaming. And then I'm going to go to Microsoft and Windows. And now this is where the cookies are. And what are cookies? Well, if you don't know, a cookie is just a piece of data that has been stored on your behalf locally by a website or web server that you have gone visiting. Normally, it would just look like garbage, and you wouldn't necessarily to be able to recognize what it is. In this case, it looks like it's a website called masstag.com that stored a cookie on my behalf. Typically, it's to have some ease of use on the part of the user. So a cookie would be stored if there were some settings or other pieces of information that you had provided to that server so that when you went back, you wouldn't have to provide it again. Sometimes it's simply to keep track of whether you've been there or not. And here's a good example of that, doubleclick.net. And doubleclick.net is a common provider of ads. And so it would have cookies in order to keep track of the real number of users that it has, I want to say infected, but the number of users that have gotten access to a site where there are DoubleClick ads that are located. So this is where all of the cookies are, and sometimes there's really useful data in here, although, as I said, it's usually obscured in some way where we may be able to take some of this and convert it using a base64 decoder or something like that. Sometimes it's as simple as doing a base64 decode to be able to figure out what the data actually is. If the developer of the website is actually smart, they won't store their cookies or the data in that way because it is so trivial to get access to it. They'll have it obscured or encrypted or stored in a way that it's not easy to just get direct access to the information. Even though the data on here is, for the most part, hidden from the average user because you've got to go through a bunch of steps and jump through a bunch of hoops in order to get access to this data, it's still sitting here on the file system, and anybody with access to the system could theoretically get access to all of this cookie data. And if it's data that's easily manipulated back into a clear text stream, then we've put that data at risk. So as I said, ideally, the developer of the website is storing their data in a way that's not just clear text and obvious to everybody. So it may take you a little bit of effort to figure out what's actually stored there. But again, these cookies can contain really critical information, sometimes really critical information, like, for example, a username or maybe even a password may be stored here. You might actually get some credit card data that's stored in these cookies, or addresses, or other types of information. You could get a session identifier so that you could get access to the user's session on a website that they've actually gone to and accessed. So cookies is also something that you want to get access to and be able to look through. It will also give you a sense of the different websites that the user may have gone to. If they're old enough so maybe they don't show up in history anymore, they may still have a cookie sitting here depending on what the expiration of the cookie is. They may still have a cookie sitting here, and you can see the cookie from a particular website and know whether that user has been to that website or somebody logged in as that particular user has been to that particular website in the past. So those are the different types of information that a web browser may actually store somewhere on a file system as users go to websites. Again, we've got the cache, and we've got the history, and we've got the cookies. All of them have potentially useful information as you are going through a forensic investigation or a forensic examination.